Yeah, looking at registration, both for students and for judges, super important, especially when you're growing with a small, whether you're doing it at a local, site, if you're doing it as a district, or obviously if you're doing it as a district-wide or something bigger like regionals. And so for me, really finding, what that purpose is, um, and knowing that you want to make sure that when you're setting up for judging and such, the first thing you want to do is kind of get an idea of how many students you're going to have. And also, you want to make sure that you have enough judges to judge them. And especially as people go to, if you're using elementary, it's fairly easy to judge generally. But as you move into high school, they start to get the things start to get pretty complicated, and you want to be able to um, provide some idea of what who's going to judge what, and so on and so. So really, you first thing your first piece is trying to get a ballpark of how many kids are going to be there, and then that way you can set it up.
Star Romaine, please place your ride at the gazebo. Star, your ride is at the gazebo. Thank you.
And still at school, so we might get some announcements over top of me, but hopefully not too many. Um, you want to make sure that when you're doing your judging and all that kind of stuff, that it also gets you to set up, how you're going to set up your fair. And so you can see a picture here. But when I'm setting things up, you're wanting to set it up so that all of the fairs, it's easy for kids to find where they need to be. It's also easy for judges to find who they need to judge, and so on and so forth. And so that's a big part of the registration, and providing some of those key pieces when you do the registration, so that it's easy to organize. I know Sarah's taught me about MS forms, highly recommended. Or if other people have other ways of doing it. For the last 10 years, I've been doing it old school, where you have a piece of paper and you write down the people's names. And that's good for late arrivals, but MS Forms is just so much better to keep everything organized. And then the hope is to the judging piece. The hope is to then use that as well, so that teachers can walk or judges can walk around with iPads and kind of fill in everything, so it all gets pre-calculated. So that's a lot quicker to find out who won and how they won, instead of sitting down and trying to do it old school to figure out who's got the top marks. Um, and feel free to jump in if you have any questions. So I've kind of talked a lot, but I'll kind of circle back. So information that you need, you're going to want student's full name in information. You don't always need their email address, but their phone number is really important in case you have to phone a student, or you can check in with the teacher who usually drops their kids off. It depends on if you guys are doing it during class time, or if you're doing it, say, on a weekend. Those things are kind of more important, so you can get an idea of who's here and who isn't. It's also important to make sure that you're in contact with judges. I always like to call judges even the night before, just to make sure that they're coming and that they remember. A lot of times they're retired or they're working on something, and sometimes things pop up and they don't get a chance to let you know, or they just completely forget. So it's really important to touch base. I would highly recommend calling, not emailing, because some people don't check their email all the time, and so then it takes a while for things to go through. You can see there again, talking about getting all the information for students. It's not as bad when you're doing it during school time. A little bit more challenging if you're doing it outside of school, like if you're not part of, say, a teacher or a part of the school district. You're going to want all that information, so that one, it kind of gives you a bit of some data for your own collection, but it also allows for people to be able to see who's coming, who isn't, and be able to contact them if need be. Really important on the registration form, and we have some examples of that through MS Forms, is the project details. This allows you to, one, place the project where it needs to be. I usually like to start with the younger grades and work your way up, kind of, however you're going to do it. So it's easy for judges to find things. In the details, you're going to want, all a kind of a description, so the judges have an idea of what they're going into, and then any other issues that might be challenging. This also allows for proper placement of judges with projects, because sometimes, depending on who we get as judges, sometimes they're just volunteers. They have no background, because we just need lots of judges. Other times they have a lot of background, and so you want to place them in maybe the higher end projects like high school and such, or really challenging grade 6, 7 projects that can provide, ask the right questions and such. Okay. So yeah, we put down a lot of stuff that you want to collect, but you don't necessarily need all of it. It all depends on kind of your region. And again, if Youth Science Canada kind of does that, and helps you manage all that a lot easier and streamline it, then please go that route. So this is kind of brought up what I think Todd brought up. So the privacy laws of registration. Obviously, you're not disclosing, transferring, selling people's information. You're not, providing, much of that information outside of the regional fair, bar, or your school fair or whatever. Really, it's for those people that are organizing it, that are going to be looking at all that information and then putting out, I've done letters in the past where, people are categorized by letters or numbers, whatever works for you, depending on the size of your fair, so that people can easily get to, because people aren't going to know, there's James down there with this project. I like to leave the name of the project and the number and the kids' names, and that's it. Because they can get the rest of the information. That they're just going there to learn about the project, not to learn about the child's background, or their personal information. And so I will always include a disclaimer with parents, really important, so that parents sign off, so there's no surprise information that they think is going to happen. Very rarely do I have a parent come and ask me this kind of stuff around privacy laws, but it has happened where parents are very sensitive. Or the more important one to be aware of is when parents come and they don't want their child's picture taken. And so, obviously everyone's running around with cameras and taking pictures of stuff. So being mindful of those families that don't want their picture taken or put in the paper, or put somewhere else. And so part of the disclosure is really, is my child allowed to be photographed, or not? And part of that is, parents don't necessarily care if they're photographed as long as it's not put on social media. And so being mindful of those pieces, because parents can get pretty sensitive over that stuff. Any questions on the privacy piece? Okay. So jumping into registration, everyone does it differently. Normally district fairs or school fairs, you're looking at about 2 weeks in advance just to get everything set up. There's always those last minute people, but to just make sure everything's set up. And again, that's really to make sure that you have enough judges to go through the system. I don't know about you guys, but in our schools, we run 2 fairs because one fair isn't. We don't have big enough space to run just one fair, and we have anywhere from 70 to 80 applicants per fair, and so that's a lot of judges to be able to do it in a timely fashion. Obviously, regional fairs, you want a little bit longer because you don't know the kids, you don't know the families or whatever, and so you want to get that information. And I think, again, that way we're science fair, our youth science fair, Canada would really come into effect, because you can put all that information into one area, and it's all kind of set up for you, and you just got to plunk in the numbers. That seems like a pretty smooth system, just like MS Forms. Pretty smooth versus the old school pen and paper, which is, it works, but it's not as efficient. And usually, again, registration closes. It's usually the night before, so that you can start setting up. Again, there's always that one or two people that show up the day of and say they weren't going to come, and then they do come. And making room for one or two kids or projects isn't too bad. But you gotta have a cutoff date at some point to make sure everything is, so you guys can get everything organized as best you can. And lastly, those kind of what we already talked about. MS Forms, Google Forms, keeps all the information. Looks like Project Board was what. I'm not sure who was talking about it. I don't think it was Todd. It was someone else. It sounds like a really cool way to go. As long as it's easy. I've never used it, so maybe you can speak to it, but hopefully it's easily accessible for people that maybe aren't part of the system. Is that true?
Well, it is designated for regions within Canada wide. So if wherever you're from, it's your regional coordinator that would have access to that portal.